Greetings, I'm Salvador Cordova. Welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel. This channel explores a wide spectrum of evidences and reasons from the Christian faith, mostly from those that I'm acquainted with, which is primarily creation science. But over the last month or so, I've been trying to expand out into other areas. Today, I'll be exploring stuff that goes back to the bread and butter of this channel, which is creation science. I am a young Earth and young cosmos creationist. That means that I believe the universe is young, and so young that it supports a literal reading of the Gospel of Luke chapter 3, the genealogy of Jesus Christ in the Gospel of Luke chapter 3, and also Matthew chapter 1. Sorry, the springtime's a little challenging as I get a little bit of allergies. I'm pleased to announce that I do, by the way, I do try to devote a certain level of scholarship in the areas of creation science. I was voted the #1 creationist YouTuber by a panel of evolutionists. They feel that my arguments are the best, though they totally disagree. And that group of people included a professional evolutionary biologist. This channel does try to reach out especially to the biology and science students in college who are Christians and who may be struggling with evolution. So the title of the segment is IDCS News. IDCS stands for Intelligent Design Creation Science. Now, even as a young Earth, young cosmos creationist, I will say that I support certain arguments, not necessarily the whole theory coming out of the ID community. There are a lot of people in the ID community, such as Michael Behe, who passively accept universal common ancestry, which I don't, but I still think some of his arguments are very good, and you'll see me defend some of his viewpoints here on this channel. It doesn't mean that I ascribe to everything that he says. Same with the old Earth creationists. By and large, I actually do view them on our side of the aisle in terms of what we're trying to argue for. Now, what distinguishes young Earth creationists from other creationists, and by the way, I need to mention this as it's relevant to today's topic, that there are varieties of young Earth creationists or young life creationists that may accept the universe is old, but then argue that the Earth is young or the fossil record is young or simply that life is young, but everything else is old. There are all these gradations. Just to set the record straight, I'll indicate you know what my viewpoint is. Now, I used to accept evolutionary theory when I was taught it in public school. I then became a Christian and then a creationist and was an old Earth creationist for a very long time. I nearly left the Christian faith about 21 years ago. And I wouldn't say I was a non-Christian, but in a sense, I was just so much on the edge, it'd be hard to say that I was. But that was a very brief bout of agnosticism. I mean, really brief, not maybe even several weeks. And I became a creationist first, and then I returned to the Christian faith. So just in case you all have heard differing accounts of my journey, if I say I was a creationist first, then a Christian, it's referring to my return to Christianity later in life, like 21 years ago. I had accepted the Lord as a teenager. So that's just to try to set the record straight. Some channels that will not be mentioned explicitly by name because I don't want to give them free advertising. They are doing everything they can to smear my character, calling me names, and they just have daily, they're starting to have almost daily sessions just trashing me personally. I'm being stalked. And but there's a saying, it's better to be criticized than ignored. It's better to be criticized than ignored. So with that, just a few just peripheral announcements just to kind of get things started on a little bit of a happier note, and then also a sad announcement. I'm going to convey a sad announcement. Condolences to the Queen of England. There she is, pictured about not quite 73, 74 years ago on her, I believe that's a wedding photo. The Queen Elizabeth with her husband, who recently passed away after 73 years. Queen Elizabeth is a favorite in my family because my mother was born the same year as the Queen, and she loves the Queen, even though we're from the Philippines. I guess for a lot of young ladies, they're always fascinated with stories of princesses, etc. And when my mother was a teenager, the princess was the eventual Queen Elizabeth. And my mother named her first daughter Elizabeth. So condolences to the Queen and her family. And 73 years is a long time to be with someone. And and speaking of weddings, we have a happy announcement. Danny, our resident philosopher, Danny the philosopher, I should mention, a little bit after midnight, this was basically Sunday morning, April 11th, this Sunday morning, in the middle of his honeymoon, he comes on our channel and announces that he got married. And this is really funny because I actually didn't know he got married recently. And I just sent him an email. Hey, Danny, can you come to my after show? And like a real pal, he showed up. And I'm just like, Danny, you don't have to do this. This is your honeymoon. You have better things to do than to hang out with us. If you see the after show on my channel, it was the after show regarding anti-theism. You'll see when Danny chimes in, he'll talk only about philosophy. And at the very end, he said, hey guys, I got married. And so we were all giving our buddy a hard time that, here it is in the middle of the night on his honeymoon and he's hanging out with us. But we would like to congratulate Danny and say, let me just, there you go. Congratulations, Danny. And, thanks for being a part of our channel and supporting it and being friendly with us and talking, even though you're an atheist and there are a lot of people praying that you'll come back to the Christian side. You're very much loved here on this channel. So with that, off to a little bit of business. Let me point out a little bit of, people say, Sal, you studied physics. I studied applied physics at the Applied Physics Lab. Well, my classes were at the Applied Physics Lab. The formal school is called Engineering for Professionals under the John Whiting School of Engineering, under the Johns Hopkins University, et cetera, et cetera. I studied applied physics. It's like, how can you be a young Earth creationist, a young cosmos creationist? Actually, when I went to school, I was kind of not sold on young Earth creationism. And like a lot of old Earth creationists, I'll tell you that a lot of old Earth creationists they have told me, and I believe them, they would be happy to be young Earth creationists if you could give them the evidence. And I totally get that, because unlike the issue with abiogenesis, we can show that abiogenesis needs a miracle. All we need is basic interpretations of accepted chemistry and physics. You could show that abiogenesis, you could make a good argument abiogenesis required a miracle, a violation of physical law. And so we can accept that. Ironically, the young Earth creationists are not invoking a miracle, not all of them, but a good number are arguing for naturalistic mechanisms to explain how we can see stars that are very, very far away from far distances. So the naturalistic mechanisms that they may invoke might be new laws of physics or interpretations of accepted laws of physics. And there's not uniform agreement on this. But what I saw when I arrived, as I was taking cosmology classes at Johns Hopkins, was this theory called inflation. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But it's basically saying that galactic amounts of matter were quote unquote moved. The proper term, as Mr. Jetty correctly pointed out, is that that space was put in between the matter. But these things were separated. Galactic amounts of matter were separated at thousands, maybe millions, maybe infinite times the speed of light. And if, for one thing, if it's infinite, it's like, how is that really different from teleportation? It's like, come on, guys. When I heard that in my cosmology class, I just about fell out of my seat. I was like, okay, I thought young Earth creationist models were outrageous. This is, this is no less outrageous or no more outrageous than anything I've heard in the young Earth community. But if it supports the Big Bang, they'll accept it. Anytime we throw out a theory that supports young Earth or young cosmos, it's suddenly cranked. But I'm just like, this isn't that much. Young Earth creationism isn't that any more outrageous than inflation theory. And I'm going to cover that in some of the articles here, because my intuition when I was sitting in that classroom, I said, this is absurd. This is ridiculous. I mean, it might, okay, let's just grant that it might be true. But I said, this just seems outrageous with no proof. Some people, by the way, Leo Phyllis is here. Thank you for visiting. He's our resident Big Bang advocate, and he's a student of cosmology. And he said it's not infinite. I've heard references to infinite. Some people like Lind they put that on the table. Okay, I don't. My textbook didn't argue for infinite. Okay, so just to set the record straight, the textbook understanding is it's not generally infinite, but it has been put on the table. So, but still, millions of times the speed of light, or could we say, even higher than that? I've seen numbers that are pretty high. How is that any more outrageous than, talking about variable speed of light? Speaking of which, that's what's motivated some of the variable speed of light theories, because some people say, this is so outrageous, why don't we just say speed of light could be variable? And when I saw that on the table, I said, maybe young Earth creationism has a chance. And so even though I don't have 100% proof, as I've often said, being a gambling man, and it's what I would call a skill gambling, you don't make stupid gambles. You make gambles based on the fact of, what do you have to lose if you're wrong, and what do you have to gain if you're right? You always try to take a bet where you have nothing to lose or very little to lose, but everything to gain. And I'm betting on a young cosmos. And that's kind of like, well, what sort of faith is that? And I'll say, okay, so let's say you're in a survival situation where your life depends on your determination to live. The odds may not look good, but the way you act, if you act like you're going to survive, you're going to behave a certain way versus being a defeatist. And so in that sense, you adopt a faith. Even though formally you haven't proven everything, you go for it. And that's kind of the faith that I have now. I have more to gain than I have to lose if I bet on the young cosmos cosmology. So with that, I'll proceed to some of my articles. Now, I'll point out, is God a possibility in physics? There is a minority that say yes. I'm not going to insist that they're correct, but neither can we disprove what they're saying. I believe this is one of those ideas that can't be formally proven. On the other hand, if you're saying that there's no God, that's a very hard proposition, because to prove that formally, you'd have to be omniscient, which would probably mean you're all-powerful. You'd also have to be eternal, which by definition means you're God. So that's kind of what I would colloquially call a no-go theorem. If you prove it, you'd actually falsify what you're trying to disprove. So, I mean, it's just not going to work, guys. These atheists that insist that there's no God, I said, there's no way you can prove it. And if you actually had the capacity to prove it, you would actually prove that God existed. So it's just like a silly assertion to make, to put your faith in. And you could say, well, you just don't believe. And it's like, okay, I'll grant that. You just don't believe, but you can't prove it 100%. And I find that to be kind of the double standard that I see. They'll demand 100% proof, and then they don't abide by it themselves in the way that they conduct their lives. I'm hoping to do a show on why atheists need a lot of faith in the way they do things. And that really came out in the recent debate I had with Amy. I said, atheists have to make decisions about what's right and wrong and what's meaningful, and you can't prove it by science. You have to make a lot of assumptions just on pure faith with no evidence. And I'm just trying to say that, lack of belief will force you to have faith in lack of belief in God will force you to have faith in other dimensions where you have not 100% proof, not even 1% proof that you're right. And what I was trying to say is that, there's a double standard here. If you guys are requiring 100% proof, you're not applying it to all the other phases of your life. So I'd like to thank everyone who's joined us to this discussion. I've rambled on. So again, for those who are wondering, why am I talking about the Big Bang? What does this have to do with Jesus Christ? Well, let me just say this. To the extent we have reasons to question the mainstream cosmology, we have reasons to think that there's a possibility the world, the universe, the reality that we know is less than 10,000 years old. If that is the case, then that would support the literal reading of the genealogies in Luke chapter 3 and Matthew chapter 1 and other places in the Bible. And that would lend credence to the idea that the Gospels and the Christian scriptures are inspired by God. And therefore, the other events in the Bible can be believed, such as the resurrection of Jesus Christ and the other things that Jesus taught us. It's that simple. And so if I get deep into the technical things, just think what the goal is. We're trying to understand cosmology as stated by the mainstream, its problems. And if it has problems, there's hope for this young cosmos model. It's as simple as that. So I'm sorry that we're going to get very technical. I do hope to have other shows on this channel that talk about scriptures, which I enjoy talking about. So let's just begin on a few things. I will start with what a professor said at my alma mater. And he wasn't quite so, he was a little bit, Richard Conn Henry, who's a professor he's the endowed chair, the Henry Rowland Professor of Astronomy and Physics at the Henry Rowland School of Astronomy and Physics at Johns Hopkins University, who recently, like I believe in the 2012 timeframe, actually had 2 Nobel laureates, one in chemistry and one in physics in the same year. One of them was Adam Rees, whom I had the privilege of meeting at a reception at the school. Adam Rees had done work on the dark energy hypothesis. But in 2005, Richard Conn Henry posted this opinion piece, but it echoes the opinion of a minority of scientists. And he writes here, interestingly, the universe is immaterial, mental, and spiritual. Live and enjoy. And you're like, whoa, what does this have to do? What is this doing in a scientific journal? That's 2005. By the way, this is an interesting year for 2005 because the Creationists were featured in a cover story several weeks earlier, including me. I was on the cover story of Nature giving my testimony of Jesus. And so 2005 was a blessed year because God let all these things appear in the world's premier scientific journal. And this one, Richard Conn Henry was articulating his view that there has to be an ultimate mind at the basis of everything. We don't see it exactly. We get hints of it here in his article, and the name of the article, well, to be straight, it is an opinion piece, The Mental Universe, Nature 436, 29, 2005. And in his other writings, he said, he believes in some sort of God, but he's an atheist. He labels himself a deist. So in the, it's one of those things, is a deist an atheist or not? But he is convinced there is some sort of ultimate conscious intelligence. And so this relates, if people ask, what's your mechanism? How is God a mechanism? It's like, well, maybe it's a mechanism that we can't describe in terms of simple mathematical laws and things that are repeatable, but there are scientists that have pointed to this, And let me show another article. Not another article. This was from the book Measurements and Time Reversal in Objective Quantum Theory, written by F.J. Belinfanti. F.J. Belinfanti's name was cited as a very important name in my statistical mechanics and thermodynamics book by Pathria and Beal. And oh my goodness, Pathria and Beal was like a miserably difficult book. I remember we had an assignment trying to calculate the entropy of a certain system. I spent 2 days on it. I thought I had a pretty good proof. It was miserably wrong, and no one got the problem correct. None of these bright students in that class got it correct. That was one of the Pathria and Beal problems. But suffice to say, F.J. Belinfanti is a respected physicist, and in his book, he says this. And by the way, this is really funny because you read all the book, it's all this technical stuff, and just kind of like in the middle of the book, out of nowhere, he says this. We thus see how quantum theory requires the existence of God. Of course, it does not ascribe to God, defined in this way, any of the specific additional qualities that the various existing religious doctrines ascribe to God. Acceptance of such doctrines is a matter of faith and belief. If elementary systems do not possess quantitatively determinate properties, apparently God determines these properties as we measure them. We also observed the fact, unexplainable but experimentally well established, that God in his decisions about the outcomes of our experiments shows habits so regular that we can express them in the form of statistical laws of nature. This apparent determinism in macroscopic nature has hidden God and his personal influence on the universe from the eyes of many outstanding scientists. And I will point out, I did a stream on the hiddenness of God. God can act in the universe, and I had a conversation with Gavin about this. God can impose regularity on the way events work so that we can predict, like, say, the orbits of planets. But he's free at any time to suspend this regularity. So let's just say that you're serving cookies out at 4 p.m. every day, and someone would just, be trained to think, oh, that's kind of a law of how the household works. But you're free to break that policy for whatever reason. And it's the same with the laws. I mean, this is the way I look at it, okay, my opinion. That God can behave in such regular ways, then he's making it easy for us to make mathematical descriptions of nature, but it doesn't mean it can't be broken. And I will point out, many cosmological models will actually invoke the suggestion that the form of the laws of physics that we have today, is, such as laws that include Planck's constant, may not have had that form before, because Planck's constant may not have the same value it has that we measure today. So that's just one example of kind of like the flexibility that's accepted even in the mainstream. So, and I also point out there are other scientists like Frank Tipler, and he was saying that he said, if I am correct, and this is in a peer-reviewed Oxford University Press book that he co-authored with John Barrow. He said, if I'm correct, I mean, this isn't a quote from the book, but he developed that material. If I am correct that the universal final state is indeed God, then every stage of universal history, in particular, every mutation that has ever occurred or ever will occur in any living being, is determined by the action of God. And his two books were The Physics of Immortality and the Anthropic Cosmological Principle. The Anthropic Cosmological Principle also got reviewed in the prestigious scientific journal Nature. Frank Tipler was mentioned in my general relativity class as a respected scientist, not in connection to this, but on his work on general relativity. So all this to point out that when people say God did it isn't an explanation, I'm like, well, there's some physicists who we may not exactly say are ID proponents that would say, well, that actually might be true. The laws of physics don't exclude it. And some will go so far to say is that the laws of physics definitely point to it. And as I said, my opinion is none of us are in a position to absolutely prove one case or the other, but the atheists can definitely not prove it. That's something to consider. They can definitely not prove that God doesn't exist. That's, they may just say that's lack of faith. Okay, so, but the way you're living your life is you're assuming that it's not true. And so the way you live your life is as if God doesn't exist. But it's still an act of faith, at least in the way you conduct your life. And I think this leads to actually some ridiculous conclusions scientifically, such as the theory of abiogenesis, the theory of evolution, and then some of the fixes that they have for the problems of cosmology. So with that, let's go to problems in cosmology. So prior to the Big Bang Theory coming into play, there was the idea of an eternal universe. And so Christians were kind of conflicted about the Big Bang. They are kind of conflicted in the present day, because on the one side, it's like the Big Bang's good because it says the universe is not eternal. That suggests a certain, kind of like creation event, and that something was behind the Big Bang. It suggests it. Can't absolutely prove it, but it's a lot better than an eternal universe perspective, because there was this book called God and the Astronomers by Robert Jastrow. And when I nearly left the Christian faith, that's a thread that I hung to, was this book, God and the Astronomers, because he was alarmed at how his colleagues were reacting to the Big Bang. This is still early on, like around the time of the observations that supposedly saw the cosmic microwave background radiation, Penzias, and I think the corresponding name escapes me. Apologies to the other Nobel laureate. When Arno Penzias made that detection, around that time, they felt that was confirmation of the Big Bang Theory, and there are a lot of scientists unnerved by that. And Robert Jastrow is pointing out it didn't seem to be a scientific disturbance. It seemed to be like metaphysical, that they were uncomfortable with the idea of the universe having a quote unquote beginning, and such that we could say it happened X number of billion years ago. And because it did have metaphysical theological implications. Yet the young Earth creationists were not happy with that, because it's like, well, that's not the right time frame. So it's been kind of a mixed bag in the Christian community. The Big Bang good, Big Bang bad. I'd say it was the correct viewpoint in the right direction versus an eternal universe. So why is it now that we're having kind of a lot of people are going back to the eternal universe theory or some sort of other theories or whatever? It is partly because there are problems in the Big Bang theory. And what I'm going to read today is stuff I've been hearing from the faculty. Even my own professors will they'll make kind of side remarks, or sometimes not so side remarks. Sometimes they'll even publish, including James Trefel, who is my professor of supplemental quantum mechanics. He said he talked to one of the people at a conference, and he said, what are your chances that the Big Bang will be falsified in 50 years? And one of them said, I think it might be. It was really more of an it's kind of a off the cuff remark. And I do believe my professor, James Trefel, supports the Big Bang, but I just found it interesting he would put that anecdote in his book. One of his colleagues was skeptical. At my university, there were other professors. At my undergrad university, George Mason, there were 3 professors that were openly against the Big Bang. Minas Kafatos, who had a PhD in physics from MIT, smart guy. Mali Makabila, I can't pronounce his name, Roy, and then Cicero Roy. Cicero Roy, I had an entire show on Cicero Roy. And so now here I'm going to add some other scientists, and I believe one of them is a Nobel Prize winner recently, Sir Roger Penrose. So the reason I mention the old universe theory, this is a lot of advocacy for something I don't like. So just it's a mixed bag. It'll say something's that the young Earth creationists should be happy about, but then some things that, kind of distasteful. But take it for what it's worth. I'm trying to show that cosmology is starting to show cracks. There've been headlines that says cosmology in crisis, where people say, we can't agree anymore on what really happened. We can't agree. I mean, they're basically saying we can't agree on what happened. So the textbook stories and origins, you can throw that out the window. It's a level playing field as far as I'm concerned. So let me just try to read through this article. And I thank you for bearing with me with all the preliminaries that I've given out. And this is January 19th, 2020. So this is dated, but I was Googling around because of recently we were having arguments about the Big Bang. And cosmology has been something close to my heart. I just haven't had the opportunity to work with it as much as I wanted to. But anyway, even 20 years ago, I was having doubts, and now it's all coming to fruition. And I'm just like, it's really satisfying to see these models that were accepted as gospel falling apart. The Big Bang is this is from BBC News, by the way, BBC News. And I love this. The Big Bang is widely accepted as being the beginning of everything we see around us. But other theories that are gathering support among scientists are suggesting otherwise. The usual story of the universe has a beginning, middle, and an end. It began with the Big Bang 13.8 billion years ago, when the universe was tiny, hot, and dense. In less than a billionth of a second, that pinpoint of a universe expanded to more than a billion times its original size through a process called cosmological inflation. And again, that's the inflation I said. When I heard about it in my cosmology class, I almost fell out of my seat. I said, I'm going to be a young Earth creationist after I heard this, okay? Next came the graceful exit, when inflation stopped. The universe carried on expanding and cooling, but at a fraction of the initial state. For the next 380,000 years, the universe was so dense that not even light could move through it. The cosmos was an opaque, superhot plasma of scattered particles. When things finally cooled enough for the hydrogen atoms to form, the universe swiftly became transparent. Radiation burst out in every direction, and the universe was on its way to becoming the lumpy entity we see today, with vast swaths of empty space punctuated by clumps of particles, dust, stars, black holes, galaxies, radiation, and other forms of matter and energy. Eventually, these lumps of matter will drift so far apart that they will slowly disappear, according to some models. The universe will become a cold, uniform soup of isolated photons. Let's see if they have pictures here. There's a beautiful picture. The universe we can currently see is made up of clumps of particles, dust, stars, black holes, galaxies, radiation. That looks like some sort of nebula. I'm not an astronomer. I do like pretty pictures like this, though. I have them on my wall posters. It's not a particularly dramatic ending, although it does have a satisfying finality. But what if the Big Bang wasn't actually the start of it all? Perhaps the Big Bang was more of a big bounce, a turning point in an ongoing cycle of contraction and expansion. Or it could be more like a point of reflection, with a mirror image of our universe expanding out the other side, where antimatter replaces matter and time itself flows backward. There might even be a mirror you pondering what life looks like on the other side. Okay. Time out here. I mean, just think of this. Is the idea of God creating things recently any more outrageous than what you've just heard? So some of these competing theories against the Big Bang, I'm like, guys, it's, which is, let me put it to, the Christians would appreciate this. Would you wager your soul on those models? I'd wager my soul on the young cosmos model being correct and these guys being wrong, because there's nothing to gain you'll hear me say that there's nothing to gain if these other models are correct, but there's everything to lose if they're false and the young cosmos model is correct. So let's just go on. Oh, it says here, there might even be a mirror you pondering what life looks like on this side. Well, if there's another Salvador out there, I think you're a great guy. I just wanted to say that. So, or the Big Bang might be a transition point in a universe that has always been and always will be expanding. All of these theories sit outside mainstream cosmology, but all are supported by influential scientists. The growing number of these competing theories suggests that it might now be time to let go of the idea that the Big Bang marked the beginning of space and time, and indeed that it may even have an end. Okay, you know my feelings on this. I told you that, but this is still a takedown of the Big Bang. So this is kind of a strange alliance between advocates of eternal universe and advocates of young cosmos cosmology. We want to see the Big Bang blown apart. Figuratively, pun intended. Many competing Big Bang alternatives stem from deep satisfaction with the idea of cosmological inflation. Just like I said, 8-9 years ago, I was sitting in cosmology class. I heard this. I said, "This is outrageous. You've made a young cosmos creationist out of me." Just in that moment. I mean, that's exaggerating because I was leaning there anyway. But that practically sealed the deal. I said, the young Earth creationists are no more outrageous than the cosmological inflationists. And I believe Leo's a cosmological inflationist. Theophilus is a cosmological inflationist. And here's a picture. It says here, scars left by the Big Bang and a weak microwave radiation that permeate the entire cosmos provides clues about what the early universe looked like. Okay, that's the mainstream theory. Okay, this is one. A quote, "I have to confess, I never liked inflation from the beginning," says Neil Turok, the former director of the Perimeter Institute for Theoretical Physics in Waterloo, Canada. And then another quote, "The inflationary paradigm has failed," adds Paul Steinhardt, Albert Einstein professor in science at Princeton University and proponent of a big bounce model. And then I believe this Roger Penrose recently got the Nobel Prize. "I always regarded inflation as a very artificial theory," says Roger Penrose, Emeritus Rouse Ball Professor of Mathematics at Oxford University. "The main reason that it didn't die at birth, is that it was the only thing people could think of to explain what they call the scale invariance of the cosmic microwave background temperature fluctuations." And this cosmic microwave background, it's abbreviated CMB, so I'll cover this a little more. This is really good stuff, and I'm sorry it's thick. This is a lot harder. Physics and cosmology is a lot harder to understand than, say, the abiogenesis debate or the evolutionary debate. And even though this is something that I studied, I'll tell you, I have a lot easier time making arguments against abiogenesis than I do the Big Bang, because it is very difficult physics. The cosmic microwave background radiation, or CMB, acronym CMB, has been a fundamental factor in the universe since it was first observed in 1965. It's a faint ambient radiation found everywhere in the observable universe that dates back to the moment when the universe first became transparent to radiation. The CMB is a major source of information about what the early universe looked like. It is also a tantalizing mystery for physicists. In every direction scientists point a radio telescope, the CMB looks the same, even in regions that seemingly could never have interacted with one another at any point in the history of a 13.8 billion year old universe. CMB temperature is the same on opposite sides of the sky, and those parts of the sky would never have been in causal contact, says Katie Mack, a cosmologist at North Carolina State University. Something had to connect those two regions of the universe in the past. Something had to tell that part of the sky to be the same temperature as that part of the sky. Without some mechanism to even out the temperature across the observable universe, scientists would expect to see much larger variations in different regions. Inflation offers a way to solve this so-called homogeneity problem, with a period of insane expansion stretching out the universe so rapidly that almost the entire thing ended up far beyond the region we can observe and interact with. Our observable universe expanded from one tiny homogeneous region within that primordial hot mess, producing the uniform CMB. Other regions beyond what we can observe might look very different. Okay, so, oh, by the way, this is a beautiful diagram. Let me see. I may have seen this elsewhere. This may actually show what they call gravitational lensing. You'll get a lot of false images because gravity is bending the light and distorting it, and things aren't exactly the way you think. What you see isn't what you get. You have to process it through. It's just like when you put analogously, it's not exactly like, but analogously, when you put a pencil in water, it looks bent. There's a lot of bending here. That's a side note. Okay, so what's the caption here? Theoretical physicists are increasingly finding that inflation theory fails to account for the spread of matter and energy observed in the universe. Theoretical physicists are increasingly finding that inflation theory fails to account for the spread of matter and energy observed in the universe. And I'm sorry to pick on Leo Filius here. He is, as far as I know, he's an inflationist. And I'm just like, Leo, no one knows for sure. I mean, it's really premature to be going off and saying we know and being so assertive of it, because you're setting yourself up for failure. I mean, why make a bet on this? Just say, there are arguments for and against. See, this is what it say. Theoretical physicists are increasingly finding. That's what I've been saying. Why am I young Earth creationist, young cosmos? Because it's been the trend. It's not been the trend that young cosmos creationism has looked worse year by year. Every year it looks better and better and better. And that's why I'm placing my bet on it. In addition to the fact that I don't think I have anything to lose. Inflation seems to be the thing that has enough support from the data that we can take it as the default, says Mac. It's the one I teach in my classes, but I always say that we don't know for sure that this happened. Good on her. That's what I say. We don't know for sure. I don't know. I don't get these guys that get on modern day debate and just insist that it's so right, and just because it's the majority view. So good on her, Katie Mack. But I always say that we don't know for sure that this happened, but it seems to fit the data pretty well and is what most people would say is most likely. But there have always been shortcomings with the theory. Notably, there is no definitive mechanism to trigger inflationary expansion or a testable explanation for how the graceful ending could happen. One idea put forward by proponents of inflation is that theoretical particles made up something called an inflation field that drove inflation and then decayed into the particles we see around us today. But even with tweaks like this, inflation makes predictions that have, at least thus far, not been confirmed. The theory says space-time could be warped by primordial gravitational waves that ricochet out across the universe with a Big Bang. But while certain types of gravitational waves have been detected, none of these primordial ones have yet been found to support the theory. Quantum physics also forces inflation theories into very messy territory. Where rare quantum fluctuations are predicted to cause inflation, rare quantum fluctuations are predicted to cause inflation to break up space up into an infinite number of patches with wildly different properties, a multiverse in which literally every imaginable outcome occurs. And what did I say again? I almost fell out of my chair when I was hearing this stuff. Is the idea of Jesus? I mean, let me just say this: when they say in which literally every imaginable outcome occurs. Every imaginable outcome occurs. So does that mean in one patch of this multiverse, Jesus did rise from the dead, and that the creationists are right, and that there was flood? I mean, just think about, the creationists point this out. They said, well, okay, so there is a universe then where Jesus walked on water. If you're going to accept multiverses like this and say all things are possible, it's like, okay, who's to say we don't live in that universe? So this leads to some very problematic philosophical directions if you take it to its final consequences. And Steinhardt says the theory is completely indecisive. Says Steinhardt, it can only say that the observable universe might be like this or that or any other possibility you can imagine, depending on where we happen to be in the multiverse. Nothing is ruled out that is physically conceivable. Okay, so it's a conceivable Jesus fed the 5,000. It's like, okay, well, here you go. We can point to this is the irony. This is what I want to point out is the irony and why I somewhat fell out of my chair. I mean, it's like, can you prove it? I'd like, okay, if you accept inflation theory, it's definitely a possibility now, isn't it? Now this is really powerful. Guess who was one of the architects of inflation theory? It was Guth, but Steinhardt, who was also Steinhardt, who was one of the original architects of inflationary theory, ultimately got fed up with the lack of predictiveness and untestability. So there you go, Leo. I'm sorry to pick on you, but you've been an inflationist. You've been promoting it, and I'm just giving you the other side. Do we, and on it, yeah, I won't go there. Do we really need to imagine that there exists an infinite number of messy universes that we have never seen and never will see in order to explain the one simple and remarkably smooth universe we actually observe, he asks. I say no. We have to look for a better idea. That's a gold line right there. All right. So people ask me, well, Sal, what sort of things in hearing that made you doubt this? And I said, it's the faculty and students. You can kind of hear it. Every now and then a minority of them say, I don't believe this, but they publish in other areas of physics. I mean, there are lots of other areas in physics other than cosmology that are very fruitful, like condensed matter physics, which is kind of my favorite. If people wanted to know my area of physics, I like condensed matter physics. I like gas, physics in gases because it's actually easier. Stuff in cosmology and astrophysics, I said I won't touch that with a 10-foot pole. Why? The problem of testability and verifiability. And it just goes into just mythology land. I mean, this article is talking about other me's and other universes. And I'll say, well, Sal, if you're out there, think you're a handsome guy, you're a great guy, but I don't know that you're out there. I just wanted to, okay, that sounds silly. I know I'm being silly. But I mean, this is the territory you go to when you invoke multiverse theories. Do we, okay, I'm just going to read this again. Do we really need to imagine that there exists an infinite number of messy universes that we have never seen and never will see in order to explain the one simple and remarkably smooth universe we actually observe? He asks. I say no. We have to look for a better idea. Here's one of them. Rather than being a beginning, the Big Bang could have been a moment of transition from one period of space and time to another, more of a bounce, and that's Steinhardt's present theory. The problem might have to do with the Big Bang itself and with the idea that there was a beginning to space and time. The Big Bounce theory agrees with the Big Bang picture of a hot, dense universe 13.8 billion years ago that began to expand and cool. But rather than being the beginning of space and time, that was a moment of transition from an earlier phase during which space was contracting. With a bounce rather than a bang, Steinhardt says, distant parts of the cosmos would have plenty of time to interact with each other and to form a single smooth universe in which the source of the CMB radiation would have had a chance to even out. I need to pause here. So much is being made of the cosmic microwave background radiation, and I don't think that the arguments have even been settled that it's cosmic. I mean, if you walk out someday on a foggy day and you don't see anything, do you say, oh, you know, the fog is spread out through the entire cosmos? No, you know, because from experience, you know, the fog can clear. But the point is, we actually don't know whether the microwave radiation we're seeing is cosmic. Our observations from where we are, just like if you're inside a cloud and you're flying in an airplane, which I have, and I shouldn't have been. Now that I don't fly, I guess the FAA can't revoke my license for flying in the cloud unauthorized. But wherever you look, every direction you look, it's the same white fog. Does that mean that it's cosmological? That's absurd. And the question has been raised. Does this microwave radiation that we see in all directions, could it possibly be local? And there have been papers recently that have put forward that idea, and it's consistent with stuff that I have seen from other authors that say this is consistent with something like what they call thermalized radiation from starlight sources. If there's a gas out there, or what they say like metal dust particles floating out there that get radiated by light, it'll generate this microwave radiation. Not to mention, there's still the ongoing debate about the axis of evil. It's just kind of a funny thing. The microwave background radiation, some people will say, has like this anomaly that it looks like an axis, an anomaly that corresponds with the tilt of our solar system. And they say that's a really strange coincidence. It's not resolved. A lot of the Big Bang advocates will say the anomaly doesn't exist, and a lot of the critics will say it does. But suffice to say, we have no way of actually proving at this point that the microwave background radiation is actually cosmic. And there was a forgotten paper that is still deplatformed that pointed out there weren't sufficient shadows. Now, other people said there's sufficient shadows. It's a whole nother discussion. But suffice to say that it's still on the table. This axis of evil problem hasn't gone away. Neither have we totally written off the possibility of a local background radiation. And for that matter, a radio astronomer by the name of Haruni said we may have not measured the CMB at all, that there may have been some problems in some of our astrophysical space probes. So I'm not saying any of us are right. I'm just saying maybe we just have to time out a little bit and say, we need more data, and then maybe it'll be clearer. Now, Lori Hayes says, could you please briefly explain your model? I'm like, I don't know. My model is let's go forward. I can tell you what I believe. I believe the universe is young. I'm sympathetic to a variable light speed model of Reginald Cahill, and I could be wrong. And I'm waiting to get more data. I've actually done some laser interferometry experiments where I tried to rebuild Cahill's interferometers. I was very fascinated by that. But I'd say no one has as much data as they'd want to prove their theory. That's the state we're in. All of us are moving by faith. And if one quarter says, oh, I'm just going by the consensus, that's a faith belief. That's not empirical. So let's continue. And again, I don't subscribe to the big bounce model, but let's just hear the gentleman out, because at least for now, he's an ally. He's an unwitting ally of the creationists, even though he's definitely not a creationist. With the bounce, okay, so Steinhardt gives his bounce model. He said, the idea is, in fact, it's possible that time has existed forever. And if a bounce happened in our past, why could there not have been many of them, says Steinhardt. In that case, it's plausible that there is one in our future. Our expanding universe could start to contract, returning to that dense state and starting the bounce cycle again. Steinhardt and Turok worked together on some early versions of the big bounce model. in which the universe shrunk to such a tiny size that quantum physics took over from classical physics, leaving the predictions uncertain. But more recently, another of Steinhardt's collaborators, Anna Ijas, developed a model in which the universe never gets so small that quantum physics dominates. It's a rather prosaic, conservative idea that at all times by classical equation, Steinhardt says. Inflation says there's a multiverse, that there's an infinite number of ways the universe might come out. And we just happen to live in the one that's smooth and flat, that's possible but not likely. The Big Bounce model says this is how the universe must be. Now, I'll point out at my school, I mentioned Adam Rees. He's the one who advocated dark energy. And he's saying that we're actually expanding. So again, we're in this situation. Everyone's has their story, and they're all very smart people. And Rees is a Nobel Prize winner, but that doesn't count for anything if they're facts to the contrary. Neil Turok has been exploring another avenue for a simpler alternative to inflationary theory, the mirror universe. It predicts that another universe dominated by antimatter, but governed by the same physical laws as our own, is expanding outwards on the other side of the Big Bang, a kind of anti-universe, if you will, if you like. Okay, time out here, guys. And I'm going to make just a theological, I'm sorry to preach here. Well, maybe I shouldn't apologize for preaching. I'll just share what's on my heart. None of these theories are testable, at least not in their lifetime, not in the lifetime of these very intelligent individuals. I mean, because I went to secular school to study cosmology and physics, I loved a lot of my professors, and they weren't creationists. I doubt many of them were even Christians. In fact, my professor of quantum mechanics, cosmology, general relativity, and astrophysics, he was Richard Dawkins' drinking pal in Oxford in the 1980s, and he tried to get me to one of Richard Dawkins' talks at University of Maryland. So no disrespect to these gentlemen, but these guys are wagering on ideas that they'll never see. The creationists, though, we say what is testable about our theory we'll pass away unless some of us live to see the return of the Lord Jesus. There'll be a judgment day. We predict, that's a testable prediction, that all of us here in this discussion will be before the throne of judgment. That's a testable prediction. These other models don't have that prediction. But just something to think about for the Christians. This is a great comfort. We actually do have a testable prediction. This is really this pretty important one too. So this stuff about anti-universes and big bounces and inflation, they're not testable in your lifetime. I take one thing away from the observations of the last 30 years, which is that the universe is unbelievably simple, he says. At large scales, it's not chaotic, it's not random, it's incredibly ordered and regular and requires very few numbers to describe everything. That's the first time I heard that, by the way. Our forward time flowing universe could have a perfect reflection that also extends out in reverse from the event we call the Big Bang. Okay. I don't get quite of this anti-universe. There was a Star Trek episode that covered the antimatter universe or something, and also one in Lost in Space. Those are two of my favorite episodes. It's neither here nor there. Now you know what kind of nerd I am. With this in mind, Turok sees no place for a multiverse, higher dimensions or new particles to explain what can be seen when we look up at the heavens. The mirror universe offers all that and might also solve one of the universe's big mysteries. If you add up all the known mass in a galaxy, stars, nebula, black holes, and so on, the total doesn't create enough gravity. The total does not create enough gravity to explain the motion within and between galaxies. The remainder seems to be made up of something we cannot currently see, dark matter. This mysterious stuff accounts for about 85% of the matter in the universe. Oh yes, this is another problem with cosmology, dark matter. And one of my professors just hated the idea of dark matter. And all the experiments so far where we try to look for it on Earth have failed. And it's like, well, maybe we're not detecting it because it doesn't exist. So here again, cosmology is appealing things that we can't test or have shown that our best test shows that it doesn't exist, but we still will blindly follow it. And this is what, you ask, why am I a creationist? Look at the alternatives. Is creationism that much more outrageous than your alternatives? Look what we're talking about. Inflation has these multiverses where anything imaginable is possible. We have this big bouncing, and then we have the we have the antimatter mirror universe. Again, all of these are, they not no disrespect to Steinhardt, but he's talking about testability. I'm just like, well, I'm not so sure your model's that testable either. So let's proceed here. The mirror universe model predicts that the Big Bang produced a particle known as right-handed neutrinos in abundance. While particle physicists have yet to directly see any of these particles, they are pretty sure they exist. And it is these that make up dark matter, according to those who support the mirror universe theory. It's the only particle on that list of particles in the standard model that has the two requisite properties that we haven't directly observed yet. And it could be stable, says Latham Boyle, another leading proponent of the mirror universe theory and a colleague of Turok at the Perimeter Institute. Perhaps the most challenging alternative to the Big Bang and inflation is Roger Penrose's Conformal Cyclic Cosmology. By the way, I love Penrose's book, Emperor's New Mind. Brilliant. It was a brilliant book. I mean, it's one of the ultimate nerd books. And he did win a Nobel Prize. I mean, it doesn't surprise me. The guy's just brilliant. The theory is called CCC. Like the Big Bang, it involves a universe that might have existed forever, but in CCC, it never goes through a period of contraction. It only ever expands. The view I have is that the Big Bang was not the beginning, says Penrose. The entire picture of what we know nowadays, the whole history of the universe, is what I call one aeon in a succession of aeons. Penrose's model predicts that much of the matter in the universe will eventually be dragged into ultramassive black holes. As the universe expands and cools to near absolute zero, these black holes will boil away through a phenomenon called Hawking radiation. And that was my last lecture in my master's program. Hawking radiation is in statistical mechanics and thermodynamics. Really cool math. You have to think in terms of something like Google, like a Gogol years, which means a number with one with 100 zeros, says Penrose. That's the number of years or more for the really big ones to finally evaporate away. And then you got a universe really dominated by photons, particles of light. Penrose says at this point, the universe begins to look much like as it did at its start, setting the stage for the start of another eon. So this is the conformal cyclic cosmology. Predicts that much of the universe will be pulled into enormous black holes that will boil away. Okay, one of the predictions of CCC is that, if you're wondering why you hear these sirens, we live right near the fire station. It's annoying. I get woken up in the middle of the night all the time. One of the predictions of CCC is that there might be a record of the previous aeon in the cosmic microwave background radiation that originally inspired the inflation model. When hypermassive black holes collide, the impact creates a huge release of energy in the form of gravitational waves. When giant black holes finally evaporate, they release huge amounts of energy in the form of low-frequency photons. Both of these phenomenon are so powerful, Penrose says, that they can burst through the other side of a transition from one aeon to the next, each leaving its own kind of signal embedded in the CMB like an echo from the past. Penrose calls the pattern left behind by evaporating black holes Hawking points. For the first 380,000 years of the current eon, these would have been nothing more than tiny points of the cosmos. but as the universe has expanded, they would appear as splotches across the sky. Penrose has been working with Polish, Korean, and Armenian cosmologists to see if these patterns can actually be found by comparing measurements of the CMB with thousands of random patterns. The conclusions we come to is that we see these spots in the sky with 99.98% confidence. The physics world has, however, remained largely skeptical of these results to date, and there's been limited interest among cosmologists about even attempting to replicate Penrose's analysis. It is unlikely that we will ever be able to directly observe what happened in the first moments after the Big Bang, let alone the moments before. Amen. Amen. The opaque superheated plasma that existed in the early moments will likely forever obscure our view, but there are other potentially observable phenomena as primordial gravitational waves, primordial black holes, right-handed neutrinos that could provide us some clues about which the theories of our universe are correct. As we develop new theories and new models of cosmology, those will give us other interesting predictions that we can look for, says Mack. The hope is not necessarily that we're going to see the beginning more directly, but that maybe, though, through some roundabout way, we'll better understand the structure of physics itself. Until then, the story of our universe, its beginnings, and whether it has an end, will continue to be debated. And I'd really like to thank everyone who's joined us for this discussion, and it's given me a chance to give you what life was like for me as a young Earth creationist going through secular cosmology, astrophysics, and I was just like overwhelmed. I said, like, Lord, there were some really smart guys who believe these things. I mean, who's right? But what turned me? I said, they're all disagreeing with each other, and they're all saying we don't know, and there are problems with every model that are fatal. That's what I got. Every model was fatally flawed, at least in the sense it couldn't be ultimately tested. I mean, I could put forth models that can't be tested too. And, it's really nice to have a model that can't be falsified, because then you can believe it's true or false. But that's what began to turn me. I said, if all these models have fatal flaws, then the young cosmos model has promise. So what did that have to do? How did I come to my conclusions? I look at that. One of my favorite passages in the Gospel of John is the blind beggar who got healed. He didn't know about all these cosmology discussions. All he knew is someone had compassion on him, told him to go wash in a pool, and his eyes were opened. And when the Pharisees were interrogating him and just trying to discredit him and discredit Jesus, he said, "One thing I know, I was blind, but now I see." So for a lot of the Christians, they have experienced God's power in their life, and that has confirmed to them the accounts of the Bible. And so the argument is, how should we read the Bible? It's always been, even before I heard about the old Earth, young Earth controversy, when I read the Bible, I said, it does seem to read like the world is young. I mean, I didn't need any particular ugaritic scholarship like what Rob Rowe advocates. I was like, just a straightforward reading of the genealogies and the Genesis account. I mean, I just read it like at the time I really was not quite a child. I was a 17-year-old in my freshman year of college. And I was like, this doesn't square with what I'm reading in Jastro's book, God and the Astronomers, which is actually a very theist-friendly, God-friendly ID book. And I just that's kind of where I went with it. So my point is if the Lord has done something close to your life and has confirmed his word, then I think I'd rather place my bets on that. When I see that life is a miracle, I'd rather place my bets that there's an intelligent designer and a creator. we may, and I have very friendly relations with old Earth creationists and even ID proponents with like Michael Behe. We may disagree on the details, but that's where I begin. I think at the very least, I can't, I'm not going to build my decisions about how to live my life based on these speculations. I mean, am I going to decide what's right and wrong and how to live my life based on the big bounce model or the cosmological inflation model or the CCC model? I think that was the coolest. The mirror universe with antimatter model, and this is the CCC model. What was that? That had the coolest name, the Conformal Cyclic Cosmology model. I mean, if you think about it, as a matter of principle, almost all of the models have to be wrong as a matter of principle because they can't all be right simultaneously. And there's a potential that they could all be wrong. And so I just go with that beautiful verse. I was, from John 9, where the formerly blind beggar said, I was blind, but now I see. And one thing I do see is these very brilliant individuals, and no disrespect to them, and I'd be happy to have them as my professors. They don't see any better than someone whose life has been touched by Jesus. I'd say that if Jesus has touched your life, you see better than most. And we can all be grateful for that. So with that, I really thank everyone who has joined the stream. I see that 23 people already. And again, congratulations to Danny, who has been a part of this channel. And there are many people praying for him that he come back to the Christian faith. But congratulations on his recent wedding. And it was great for him to visit this channel on his honeymoon. So take care, everyone. Have a good day, and God bless you.